All right, so we've all heard the story, right? It's one of the most famous tales in American history. On a windy night back in 1871, a cow in a barn kicks over a lantern and boom, the entire city of Chicago burns down. But this isn't just about the fire. Nope. This is really about how the media can create a legend and in doing that completely destroy the life of a real person. So, here's the big question we're diving into. Did it actually happen that way? Was a poor Irish immigrant's cow really to blame for one of the biggest disasters of the 19th century? Or is this whole thing just a classic case of a story that was simply too good to fact check? So here's how we're going to break it down.
Okay, to really get to the truth here, you first have to peel back the layers of the caricature to find the actual person. So before we even talk about the flames, let's talk about the woman who got blamed for it all. Her name was Catherine O'Leary. And it's so important we start there, with her name, because behind this massive, enduring legend, there was just a person, a real human being. The reality of her life was, pretty normal for the time. Catherine O'Leary was an Irish immigrant. She was a wife, a mom to 5 kids. She and her husband, Patrick, lived on DeCoven Street in a pretty poor neighborhood. And to help support her family, she ran a tiny milk business right out of her barn, milking her 5 cows every single day. She was just a typical working-class person trying to get by.
All right, so how on earth does this ordinary woman become the villain of this story? Well, it all started with the newspapers. They took a tiny rumor and fanned it into a nationwide sensation.
You have to see how fast this thing spread. I mean, it's pretty stunning for the 1870s. The day after the fire starts, the Chicago Evening Journal prints the first little mention of a cow and a lantern. The very next day, it's already in Milwaukee. The day after that, it's all the way down in New Orleans. The story was just so catchy. But it was the Chicago Times that really poured gasoline on the whole thing. This sentence right here, this is the one that sealed Catherine O'Leary's fate. The Chicago Times didn't just repeat a rumor. They painted this incredibly vivid, dramatic scene. You can almost see it playing out, can't you? The cow, the flickering lamp, the explosion. It's cinematic. It's exciting. And, as we're about to find out, it was completely and totally made up. Now, this is where the story gets really ugly. The reporter, a guy named Frank Wilkie, didn't just invent an action, he invented a whole persona for Mrs. O'Leary, and he did it by leaning on some really nasty anti-Irish stereotypes. He called her old. She was actually only 35. He described her as ragged and dirty and claimed she was wailing in a way he said was typical for her country women. He turned a real person into a cartoon villain to sell newspapers. But while the newspapers were busy spinning this wild tale, Catherine O'Leary had a very, very different story about that night. And, in stark contrast to all that media hysteria, her response was quiet, consistent, and calm. This is one of the very few times we hear from Catherine O'Leary herself. And in an interview, she was just incredibly clear and direct. She said she never milked her cows at night, always in the daylight. And this is the crucial part. She said she never, ever took a lamp or a candle into the barn. Her denial couldn't have been more simple or more total. I mean, when you put it all side by side like this, the difference is just staggering. The papers created this story of a 70-year-old woman stumbling around a barn at night with a lamp. The reality? A 35-year-old woman who milked her cows during the day, never used a lamp, and by every single account was sound asleep in her bed when that fire started. So we've got the media's crazy story versus her simple one. Who was telling the truth? Well, the city of Chicago actually launched a formal investigation to get to the bottom of it. And they had every reason to. This was no small fire. It destroyed over 17,000 buildings. It left a third of the entire city's population homeless. The stakes for getting this right were unbelievably high. The city's Board of Police and Fire Commissioners was put in charge of figuring out exactly how the fire started, and they took it seriously. They conducted a major inquiry, taking sworn testimony from 51 witnesses over several weeks. And yes, that included Catherine O'Leary and her husband. And look at this. This is the official verdict. It's so important. The board confirmed, yes, the fire started in the O'Leary barn. But the cause? They officially stated they were unable to determine it. And even more importantly, they found zero proof that anyone had even been in the barn that evening. And they specifically said the entire O'Leary family was in bed and asleep. The official verdict completely 100% cleared them. So, if the official investigation cleared the O'Learys, that leaves a giant burning question, doesn't it? Where did the most famous detail of the entire event, the cow and the lantern, actually come from? Yeah, let's pull back the curtain on this bit of journalistic history. It turns out the story didn't come from a witness. It didn't come from a confession. It came straight out of a reporter's imagination. Multiple historical sources all point to this one guy, Michael Ahern. He was one of the reporters covering the fire, and his story ended up shaping the entire public narrative for over a century. And there it is. Years later, Ahern apparently admitted that he just made it all up. He needed a more exciting, a more colorful origin for the fire than just, we don't know how it started. So he invented the entire story of Mrs. O'Leary and her clumsy cow. Why? Simply to make his article more interesting. The whole thing was a hoax. But here's the really tragic part. The confession came way too late. The official verdict was buried deep in city records, but that story about the cow, it was everywhere. And for Catherine O'Leary, this lie had devastating, permanent consequences.
She became a national pariah, a villain. For the rest of her life, she was harassed and scorned. In the popular press, she wasn't just some clumsy old woman. They drew her as a literal witch, sometimes even a devil with horns. She rarely left her house and was haunted by this lie until the day she died. That is the very real human cost of a story that's just too good to check.
And that really brings us to the heart of it all. The story of Mrs. O'Leary isn't just some dusty old piece of history. It's a powerful lesson about media, about misinformation, and about our own desire for a simple story over a complicated truth. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other things that we accept as solid fact are really just a reporter's invention to make a better story?